In the heart of a quiet valley, golden autumn light falls over rows of ancient olive trees, their silver leaves trembling gently in the cool morning breeze. This is Hayes Valley, home to a dozen olive farms that have fed generations, and to one farmer whose methods no one else understands. Walter Hayes, 73 years old, walks slowly between his trees, a woven basket of gray sand and fine wood ash resting against his hip. He kneels beside the trunk of an old olive tree and carefully spreads a thin layer of the sand-ash mixture around its exposed roots. His weathered hands press the mixture into the soil with practiced care, a ritual he has repeated every autumn for over 40 years. Across the fence, Frank Colton leans on his truck, arms crossed, watching Walter with a smirk of disbelief spreading across his face. "You're wasting good sand on dirt, Walter," Frank calls out, laughing, while gesturing toward his own neatly plowed, untreated olive rows. Other farmers gather near the fence line, chuckling along with Frank, shaking their heads at the sight of Walter's strange gray-dusted trees. "Ash and sand won't save your crop, old man," one farmer shouts, pointing at Walter's grove. "Modern fertilizer is the only thing that works." Walter straightens his back slowly, dusts off his hands, and looks at the group with a calm, unreadable expression, saying nothing at all. That evening, inside a small farmhouse kitchen, Walter's wife Ruth Hayes sets down 2 plates of stew and glances at his tired eyes. "They laughed at you again today," Ruth says softly, placing her hand over his. "Does it bother you, after all these years?" Walter shakes his head and smiles faintly, saying, "My grandfather taught me this. The land remembers what people forget, Ruth." Through the kitchen window, the last orange light fades behind the hills, and Walter's gray-dusted olive grove glows faintly in the dusk. Weeks pass, and the valley settles into its usual November rhythm, farmers pruning branches, harvesting olives, preparing crates for the coming season. Frank Colton stands proudly beside his overflowing olive crates, boasting to a younger farmer about his modern irrigation and fertilizer system. "Old Hayes still plays in the dirt like his grandfather," Frank says with a grin, loading another crate onto his truck bed. Meanwhile, on the local radio inside Walter's kitchen, a meteorologist warns of an unusual cold front moving rapidly toward the region. Ruth turns up the volume, her brow furrowing with concern, as the announcer describes temperatures expected to plunge far below normal. Walter listens closely, sets down his cup of tea, and walks to the window, staring out at his silver-green trees in silence. The next morning, the sky over Hayes Valley turns an unfamiliar shade of pale gray, and the wind carries a sharp, biting chill. Frank steps outside his farmhouse, rubbing his arms against the sudden cold, frowning up at the strange, heavy clouds rolling over the hills. By midday, thin sheets of frost begin creeping across exposed fields, coating fence posts and truck windshields in a fine white layer. Farmers rush from their houses in panic, wrapping burlap around tree trunks and lighting small fires, desperately trying to protect their crops. Walter stands calmly at the edge of his grove, watching the frost spread across the valley floor, his expression steady and unafraid. That night, the temperature drops further than anyone predicted, and a hard, killing frost settles heavily over every farm in the valley. By dawn, Frank Colton walks into his olive grove and stops cold, staring at rows of blackened leaves and frozen, split branches. He drops to his knees beside a ruined tree, running his fingers over brittle, frost-burned leaves that crumble instantly at his touch. Across the valley, other farmers emerge from their homes to the same devastation. Entire groves turned brown and lifeless overnight. One farmer sits on his tractor, head in his hands, staring at an entire season's harvest, destroyed in a single freezing night. Ruth Hayes rushes outside in her coat, breath visible in the frigid air, and looks anxiously toward Walter's silent, frost-covered grove. Walter walks slowly between his trees, and to his quiet relief, the leaves remain green, the branches flexible, the trunks unharmed. He kneels and presses his palm against the base of a tree where the sand-ash mixture lies buried beneath a thin crust of frost. The soil beneath the mixture is noticeably warmer than the surrounding ground, and Walter nods to himself, satisfied but not surprised. Word spreads quickly through the valley that Walter Hayes's olive grove survived the frost, completely untouched, while every other farm was destroyed. Frank Colton stands at the edge of his ruined property, staring across the fence at Walter's thriving, green, undamaged olive trees. Later that afternoon, Frank walks slowly across the frost-hardened field toward Walter's farmhouse, his usual confidence completely gone from his face. He stops at the fence, hesitates, then finally speaks, his voice quiet and stripped of its earlier mockery. "How, Walter? How did you know?" Walter walks over, brushing sand from his hands, and looks at Frank with no trace of pride, only quiet understanding. "It's not magic," Walter says, kneeling beside a tree. The sand and ash hold the sun's warmth and release it slowly through the night. He scoops a handful of the gray mixture and lets it fall through his fingers, explaining how it insulates the roots from sudden freezing. Frank crouches beside him, studying the mixture closely, his earlier laughter now replaced by genuine, focused curiosity written across his face. "My grandfather learned it from farmers before machines and fertilizer," Walter continues. "Sometimes the oldest answers are still the right ones." By the following weekend, a small crowd of neighboring farmers gathers at the edge of Walter's grove, notebooks and buckets in hand. Frank stands among them now, no longer mocking, but listening carefully as Walter demonstrates how to mix the sand and ash correctly. One by one, the farmers kneel beside their own young trees, spreading the same gray mixture Walter has used for over 40 years. Ruth watches from the farmhouse porch, a warm smile crossing her face as she sees the very neighbors who once laughed now learning. Months later, spring arrives in Hayes Valley, and for the first time, every grove along the fence line carries the same gray-dusted roots. Frank walks through his own recovering grove, kneeling to check the soil around a young tree, his movements now careful and deliberate. He looks across the fence at Walter, working quietly among his trees as always, and gives a small, respectful nod. Walter returns the nod, then continues his slow, familiar walk between the olive trees, the same ritual, the same quiet confidence. As the sun sets over Hayes Valley, the camera pulls back to reveal every grove now thriving, green, and protected by the old method. A narrator's voice speaks gently over the golden landscape. Sometimes the wisest answers are not new, they are simply remembered. The final image lingers on Walter and Ruth Hayes, standing together at the edge of their grove, watching the valley glow in the evening light. Text fades in over the scene, "The Smart Farmer versus Climate." Subscribe for more stories of quiet wisdom against nature's harshest tests.